So I'm here to talk about social dilemmas, contracts, and aggregating attitudes. So again, I'm coming at this from a very economic theory point of view. It's possible that I am being at times philosophically sloppy. So please call me out in the Q&A. All right, how do I change? There we go. All right, so Martinelli and Least and Pettit both emphasize the concept of aggregation when they're defining collective agency. Martinelli says collective agents form collective deliberation by aggregating the attitudes of their individual members. Least and Pettit talk about an attitude aggregation mechanism that's kind of in effect like this function that maps individual attitudes sort of as inputs to collective attitudes as outputs. So, from my point of view, please correct me if I'm wrong, they seem to be making something like the following claim. For each existent collective agent, there will always exist some corresponding aggregation mechanism or function. Ideally, we might be able to represent this mathematically. That's going to cleanly map the attitudes, aims, or goals of the individuals of which the collective agent is composed to the attitudes, aims, or goals of the collective agent itself. In other words, the goals of the individual members must correspond to the goals of the collective agent, and we as the analysts observing the situation must always be able to describe some sort of plausible means by which the former are turned into the latter. So we might think that many social and governmental institutions are best thought of as collective agents. For many types of social institutions, there's like a clear and obvious mapping between the goals of the collective agent and the goals of the individual members. Because the attitudes of the individuals are perfectly, or we might think almost perfectly aligned, it's pretty easy to build a simple function aggregating the individual preferences. We might first consider something like a hobby club, maybe a chess club. The goal of each individual member of the club is to play chess with others, and this clearly corresponds to the goal of the collective, which is to play chess as a group. If an individual member decides that playing chess is no longer a personal goal of his goals no longer align with the group's goals, he might choose to exit the group, and then new individuals who have recently developed personal goals that involve playing chess against others might enter the group and replace him. So the only problems confronting this type of hobby group and its continued existence are those of pure coordination. When to meet, where to meet, who's going to bring the boards and pieces and everything we need, etc. So as long as there are a sufficient number of individuals who are interested in playing chess and those individuals can communicate and coordinate their behavior, the club will continue. But things become a lot more complicated when we start considering internal structures of other types of social institutions within which the goals or preferences of individuals are maybe only partially coincident with the goals or preferences of the collective. And what I'm thinking about here in particular are the types of situations we might term social dilemmas, collective action problems, or like end-person prisoners dilemmas. Multiple words that all basically mean the same thing. In these situations, the preferences and goals of the individuals are only partially coincident with the preferences and goals of the collective, and it becomes more difficult to determine how we can create a sort of clean mapping or function between the attitudes of the individuals and the attitudes of the collective. I want to begin by suggesting that in social dilemmas, where the goals of the collective agent are only partially coincident with the goals of its individual members, the sort of aggregation mechanism or function that's going to map the interests of the individuals to the interests of the collective is best understood as a sort of contract, whether implicit or explicit. And then later in the paper, I draw on Pettit 2001 to argue that explicit documented contracts are often necessary to establish the threshold level of common belief that's required to facilitate cooperation in these types of situations. So because I'm a game theorist, and if you ask me to write a paper, I'm pretty much always going to write a game theory paper. I'm using a simple game theoretic model just to understand how these contracts can act as effective attitude aggregation mechanisms in social dilemmas. All right, so chart, fancy. Try to keep it simple. Suppose that some number of people N wish to organize themselves in order to promote some sort of common interest, or to organize to bring into existence some improved state of affairs from which they can all benefit. We have N individuals. Each of the N individuals has her own individual preferences that are going to be sort of like the ones in this table off to the right. So they're all facing the same dilemma, right? They value the collective goal. They all prefer a state of the world in which the collective goal is achieved, one in which it's not achieved, regardless of what they themselves do. But they're also feeling this individual temptation to shirk their duties to the collective. And they prefer a situation in which only other people perform the work required to achieve the collective goal to one in which they themselves are required to work to achieve it. So that's the difference between the three down here and the two up here. They would rather have this three. They would rather not put any work in and still the collective achieves the goal versus putting the work in order to achieve the goal. So there's this tension because the personal incentives are partially conflicting with the collective goal here. Every party to the collective action problem is going to feel this exact same tension. Further exacerbating this problem is the fact that the collective goal is most likely impossible for any one, two, three, or small number of individuals to achieve on their own. And the result is that all individuals are likely to behave in a sort of risk-averse way. They might refuse to work towards the collective goal out of fear that an insufficient number of others will also put in the necessary work and that their personal labor will go to waste while the collective goal remains unaccomplished. So in this type of situation, it involves partially conflicting preferences. How might a contract, either implicit or explicit, act as a sort of attitude aggregation mechanism, mapping the individual's desires to achieve the collective goal to the collective desire that the goal be achieved? All right, so I think about implicit contracts first. Implicit contracts are generally only made possible via unwritten social rules, behavioral strategies, some sort of norms of engagement that are going to punish, usually socially, but sometimes financially or otherwise, individuals who shirk their socially recognized duties to the groups of which they're a part. So long as everyone knows that everyone is willing to engage in social punishment of shirkers, and the punishment is of sufficient severity to disincentivize shirking. And shirkers can be reliably identified and targeted for punishment. The members of our collective should not be willing to shirk their duties to the group. And so this is a slightly modified version of the table we saw before. We see they're paying a small penalty in the event that they shirk. So the collective goal is accomplished because the personal incentives of each member of the collective are now perfectly aligned with the pursuit of the collective goal. There now exists a clean and clear mapping between the attitude of the individual and the collective attitude. But Pettit 2001 notes that in order for a collective to form a joint intention, here's a quote, there must be common belief present as to which each believes about others, as to how each is ready to act in the event of others acting in a complementary way, and so on. The relevant notion of common belief in play here is reasonably familiar. It will be a matter of common belief among a number of people that P, so far as each believe that P, and each believes that each believes that P, and each believes that each believes that each believes that P, and so on. So in implicit contracts like the one that we just went through, each individual's incentive to shirk work towards the collective goal begins where their common belief that they can and will be punished for shirking ends. Systems of social punishment sort of require that shirkers first be accurately identified in order to be punished, and logistical difficulties associated with identifying shirkers increase as groups get larger. There's sort of a maximum collective size for these implicit contracts. And implicit contracts, they don't really work once your group is past a certain size. Pettit continues, agreeing with this point that I made, saying a small grouping might manifest the rich structure of a common belief that is generally posited in the literature, but it's doubtful if any large-scale group could instantiate such a structure of common belief without seizing up. Because implicit contracts can't act as effective attitude aggregation mechanisms for collectives that are past a certain size, incentivizing members of large groups to work towards a collective goal is usually going to require some sort of explicit, well-documented contract that may carry enforceable legal ramifications for shirkers and that can be equally read and understood by all members of a group. And then it is the legal penalties of violating the contract rather than social punishment that affects the transformation of the social dilemma over on the left into the collaborative game over on the right. So DeSoto in 2000 argues that the legitimization of contracts within legally recognized document systems is key to the prosperity of Western nations. As such, contracts allow for enforceable property rights, and then we can, of course, use those property rights to put assets up as collateral, secure funds for enterprise, etc. As I've argued here, explicit contracts also enable sort of social prosperity, insofar as they let us legally require members of large collectives to engage in personally costly, but socially or collectively beneficial behaviors. So you might think that what I've just done is extend DeSoto's arguments to social goods. So summary, the reason why contracts function as effective attitude aggregation mechanisms is because they successfully align the preferences and goals of individuals with the preferences and goals of the collectives to which they belong. The alignment is typically accomplished via some sort of punishment that's meted out to individuals who fail to follow the explicit or implicit terms of the contract. And then, because collective belief and effective social punishment is only possible within small collectives, the contracts that are intended to enforce individual behaviors that align with the collective goals must be made explicit when collectives are large. All right, that's all I got. Thank you guys. And I'm sorry that I think I went a couple minutes over.
That's no problem. So I have some questions, but maybe someone else wants to go first. John,
You look like you want to say something, John.
he
Oh
don't.
no, no, I was just thinking I didn't have a question ready yet. Sorry.
Christian?
Yeah, I think I'm still like processing the information, but I think what I want to push on is potentially like um these sort of actors, or even like shirkers, I guess, that may behave socially correctly, but don't ha intend to behave that way at the very like
Oh,
instance
like
of
if
the
they
just
do it accidentally, then they don't get punished.
right. Yeah. So it's like someone who's just it's like a it's pushing on like a gray area, right? But it seems like there might be people that unintentionally do these things. But the
Yeah, I'm not
ones
sure
that
if that
actually
disproves the thing, though. It's
yeah.
interesting to think about, and it's something I do think a lot because I've done some work in before I came here, I was in Irvine and I did mostly evolutionary game theory. So a lot of
Mm.
that is like looking at agents who they don't really know what they're doing. We don't assume they're rational, and it's just sort of like, well, you did the thing, yay, like you get like fitness points or whatever. So I think that's kind of like the agents you're suggesting. They like don't really know what they're doing, but they kind of do the thing, and then maybe they get socially rewarded for it, but they don't really understand what they did.
Yeah, I mean, even in the case of, I have a buddy who just recently got like a present because his company does like this, like if you do this like meditation routine for like 30 days straight, we give you like a little journal and a pen, a nice pen. Um, he told me he did it for like 3 days actively, and then after that, he just like marked that he kind of did it, and he got awarded for it for doing nothing, which
Okay.
so
So
there's
this
like
might be like faulty detection mechanisms because it seems like he's shirking, but it's just that no one's cottoning on to the fact that he's shirking and he's still getting the reward at the end.
right.
Okay.
So I guess I'm trying to point toward this like area of like it seems like this would be good, but it seems like we would need like a sort of mechanism that catches these shirkers, but to have like such a mechanism and to even like even potentially like filter out bad actors versus like unintentional actors also. Because it could have been the case where he was like meaning to do it and he was trying to take the time, but maybe um something was on his mind, some other information in his life or that just didn't allow him to do it consciously well. Um, that's kind of like where I'm kind of pointing towards. And I guess, yeah, just wanted to hear like, what are your thoughts on like trying to create a sort of system that might catch these like sort of actors, I guess, out in the world, agents?
I mean, detection systems are another thing that we game theorists study a lot because it's like you want a detection system that's robust enough to catch the guy who's doing the bad thing. But then if you put too much work into making your detection system, then you're actually losing more than you're gaining. Because it's so costly to build the system. So I'm sure that there for any type of system, there's like an optimal amount of investigation into shirking. So you're right that we might be below the maximum, like efficient amount we could achieve if we had no shirkers, but it might just be to costs associated with better monitoring.
Are you familiar with a Yale professor of law by the name of Scott Shapiro?
I am not.
Okay, so I think he is somebody who is in the same boat in some respects with De Soto, but he is addressing issues which are closer to what you're interested in. So the paper that impressed me was it's called Massively Shared Agency.
Okay.
And he starts by criticizing philosophers who do speech act theory because he says that they simplify just by assuming that everyone shares the same rules. And so there is no shirker problem. And his idea is that the shirker problem is addressed by hierarchy. Now, what this means, it's like an army. So you have the troops, and then you have the corporals. The corporals watch over the troops, and then you have the sergeants who watch over the corporals. Then you have the lieutenants who watch over the sergeants, and then you have the
Mhm.
field marshal at the very top. And each one of those groups in the hierarchy is playing. And now I'm not an expert on game theory, but I will risk everything by saying they're playing their own little game.
Yeah.
And this is connected with the idea of documents also, because
Mhm.
you have to have rules for each of these little groups, and you have to have someone who explains the rules and trains the people to follow the rules. And so the army devotes a huge amount of time to training. And now Shapiro uses this as a basis for an understanding of what the law is generally. So the law is divided into jurisdictions, which are progressively smaller. It's not quite the same, but that's the way he goes. I haven't read his books on the law itself. I was impressed by his stuff on shared agency, basically.
Okay. Thank you for letting me
And
know.
so,
I
but
have
this
not heard of that.
yields to a challenge. So it seems to me that this breaks the game theory approach.
Well, my another thought of mine is that the hierarchy thing might solve some of Christian's worries about like the costliness of monitoring. Is I imagine if each person in the hierarchy only has to monitor a certain number of
Yeah,
people,
exactly.
that takes
Seven
some of
is
the
the
cost out
magic
of it.
number.
All right, John, is there anything you wanted to add? I have taken up too much time already.
Oh, I mean, I would guess I was also just thinking with the hierarchy there. I mean, I guess that is, aren't they in the same way like punishing shirkers by catching them? And then in the army, at least, like I feel like people are punished when they're not pursuing the common goal. I don't know. That's just really all I'd add. I don't know.
Okay.